In 2019, YouTube was caught violating the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. Since settling, YouTube has enacted new policies that are meant to serve as a smokescreen so they can dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators. As such, for my own protection, it is my obligation to advise you that this video is not aimed at children. My target audience is not children. Parental discretion is advised. Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. Today, we are looking at the final part of the Master Trilogy, Doctor Who, The Two Masters, released in June of 2016, written by John Dorney, directed by Jamie Anderson. The Two Masters stars Sylvester McCoy as the Seventh Doctor, Jeffrey Beavers as the Decaying Master, and Alex Mcqueen as the Reborn Master. Now, I normally say, because I do these unscripted, I put a blanket spoiler warning just in case. However, there is going to be no just in case here. There is a blanket spoiler warning. In order to properly review the story, I do have to talk about the spoilers. And I'm just going to start off by saying I love the Two Masters. A couple years ago, when Big Finish was celebrating their 20th anniversary of doing Doctor Who audios, not their 20th anniversary, I did a little video celebrating it as well, talking about what my favorite audio for each Doctor was. And at the time, I said my favorite Seventh Doctor audio was the Two Masters. That's no longer the case. Not because my thoughts on it have lessened over time or on re-listen. It's still a really phenomenal story. It's pretty much changed to... Since then, I've heard more Seventh Doctor audios. And if you're curious, my favorite Seventh Doctor audio at the moment is Damaged Goods. Anyway, so the Two Masters. It's kind of hard to wrap my head around this talking about it because what happens in the first half of the story is kind of inconsequential. So throughout this story, history is starting to disappear. Patches of time are ceasing to exist. And only certain islands are still standing, which is where this story opens. And the Doctor, at the beginning, when he recruits his one-off companion for this story, a young woman named Jemima, he runs into the Rocket Men. The Rocket Men are one of Big Finish's original recurring villains, like the Scorchies or the 11 or Nimrod in the Forge. They are pirates, I think. I don't know. I've only heard the two Seventh Doctor Rocket Men audios, this and the Split Infinitive from Legacy of Time, so I don't know a lot about the Rocket Men. But the way this story progresses, it's kind of inconsequential, because this is where the Decaying Master, Jeffrey Beavers, finds the Doctor, and then he recruits him and Jemima, again his one-off companion for this, to help him take down his other self, the Mcqueen Master. And again, what's going on in part 2, this sort of civil war that the Doctor and the Masters get caught up in, is also inconsequential. So it's because it's just, where everything meets up, and we begin putting everything together for the finale of this story, which takes up the last 2 episodes. It's kind of... What's a good example? It's almost like it's... No, I was going to say it's almost like it's 3 different stories going on, but that's really not the case, and it's kind of a poor comparison to make. So do I want to go into performances yet, or do I want to try to finish recapping the plot? So, as I mentioned in my reviews for the Master Trilogy, there was a bunch of things that had happened. In And You Will Obey Me, there was a bounty placed on the Master's head, leading to the various bounty hunters looking for him. In Vampire of the Mind, the Master was trying to steal the Doctor's mind because his had been severely affected. He didn't know what happened to himself, and he'd lost the ability to pilot his TARDIS. So, what's been going on? Well, it turns out that the Masters have switched bodies. So, in And You Will Obey Me, it was the Jeffrey Beavers Master, but it was Alex Mcqueen in his body. And similarly, in Vampire of the Mind, it was the Alex Mcqueen Master, but with Jeffrey Beavers in his body. And who would be insane enough to have the Master switch bodies? A doomsday cult. Yeah, so the main antagonist of this story is a cult called the Cult of the Heretic. The Heretic was a Time Lord, because it's always a Time Lord, who thought the universe was sick, and he decided to heal it in the way Time Lords heal, via regeneration. And so before he was captured and killed, he left the plans to restart the universe in the hands of his followers, the Cult of the Heretic. And the Master, the Mcqueen Master in this case, found out about the cult and decided, he wanted to use their spaceship called the Anomaly Cage for his own purposes. They agreed to let him the cult agreed to let him use it in return for his Time Lord biodata, which they would use to regenerate the universe, and in exchange for him killing his earlier self. Because what the Anomaly Cage does is, if you're in it, you're essentially in a paradox-free zone. Paradoxes can't affect it. And essentially, as time falls apart, the Anomaly Cage will emerge through unscathed. That was how the Heretic and his cult were going to restart the universe and live through the end of the universe. The idea is the Master would kill his earlier self, and because he would still be alive, that would be the paradox that destroys the universe. And where do I want to... And so the Master decides to kill his earlier self, the Jeffrey Beavers Master, on the planet Terceris. Sound familiar? Well, this is something I've kind of been saving because it's something I want to talk about. There is kind of a little mix-up here. On this cover, and the cover for And You Will Obey Me, it should technically be the Peter Pratt Master from The Deadly Assassin. So, oh boy, there's going to be a lot of tangents in this because there's a lot of things that tie this story together. So, Roger Delgado regenerated into Jeffrey Beavers. And then Jeffrey Beavers came to the planet Terceris, where he was horribly burned and scarred, by the Mcqueen Master, turning him into the Peter Pratt Master from The Deadly Assassin. And then, during the events of The Deadly Assassin, right before the Doctor defeated him, the Master was able to absorb some of the energy of the Eye of Harmony, which partially rejuvenated his body, turning him into the Jeffrey Beavers Master that we know. But yeah, that's just a fun little nod. I'd really like to see a fan artist or something redo the covers for And You Will Obey Me and the Two Masters with the Peter Pratt Master. Anyway, wow, that was kind of all over the place. So, oh boy, there is so much ground to still cover with this story. There is a lot to talk about with the Two Masters. So I will stop there in recapping the plot and get to the performances. The performances are all really solid. Sylvester McCoy gives a really interesting performance considering where the Seventh Doctor is in his life right now. This story, I believe, takes place right before the Master's trial and thus the events of the Seventh Doctor's regeneration. This story takes place right before the movie. Which, when a lot of people talk about the characterization of the Seventh Doctor, there's one of two things they talk about. Sort of the grand clown of season 24, and that more darker schemer persona of season 25 and 26. But then there's a third leg of the Seventh Doctor's character that no one really talks about. Probably because it's not a characterization we see a lot. The phase right at the end of his life, right before the TV movie, he's, the weight of his actions have begun catching up with him, and they've begun weighing heavily on him and his conscience, this kind of melancholy performance, again, less master schemer and more just melancholy, the weight of his actions have caught up with him. That kind of characterization existed in Master. the Jeffrey Beavers story, not the Eric Roberts box set. And it's interesting because once again, McCoy, because once again, the Seventh Doctor here is near the end of his life. But McCoy is giving it this really energetic performance, akin to what we saw earlier in season 24. And that performance is absolutely delightful, I remember seeing somewhere, me and my friends talked about it, an interview or something where McCoy said he actually prefers the earlier characterization of the Seventh Doctor over the later one. And, even though this is later in the Seventh Doctor's life, McCoy's performance really showed it. He is obviously having a lot of fun with this story. And I find that the Seventh Doctor is used really cleverly in this story. He's barely in it. The star of this story is the titular two Masters, but McCoy is barely in it. But when he's more prevalent in the first half than the second half. But when he does show up, he's enjoyably smug is the way to put it. All he really does is explain why the Master's plan was gonna fail, and there's this delightful smugness to him, and no, that's pretty much it. I don't know what I was gonna add to that. There's this delightful smugness to him. There's a little bit more of that clownishness in his persona. And as I said, the star of this story are the two Masters. Jeffrey Beavers and Alex Mcqueen are both absolutely brilliant. In the first half of the stories, when they're playing each other, because Jeffrey Beavers is playing the Alex Mcqueen Master, because that's who's in that Master's body, and vice versa, they do it so well. Beavers has that insane manic energy. He's obviously enjoying the destruction and the pain he's causing, whereas Mcqueen is much quieter, much more calculating. And then when they are able to get back into their original bodies, they slip into their natural personas so well. Actually, that's no, never mind. I was going to say that's kind of a weakness of the previous two stories, is that they aren't playing the Master's body swapped, but it's on there. But that's kind of what helps the story stand on their own, so it's fine. And in the second half of the story, when they team up, they are still just absolutely brilliant together. Their rapport is really good. Their back and forth is really good. And even when they start to hate each other, which does not take long, it's just so much fun. And that's what the two Masters really is. It's fun. What else is there? Because like I said, there is still a lot to unpack about this story. It's interesting because this came out, I think, at least a couple years before World Enough in Time, The Doctor Falls came out. So really, this was the first multi-master story we ever got. And if you listen to this, especially before the Series 10 finale or even Masterful, it illustrates beautifully why multi-master stories don't work. And I mean that as a compliment, because I've been gushing about this story for 13 minutes. It's because, the Master is a backstabber. Whenever he teams up with someone or uses someone, in the end, as soon as they are no longer useful to him, he is going to betray and kill them. Even if it means it's his own self. The Master, as Mcqueen says several times, as Mcqueen, Beavers, and even McCoy say throughout this Doctor, he's the Master. And even McCoy says throughout this story, as Mcqueen, Beavers, and even McCoy say throughout this story, he's the Master. There's a clue in the name. Ooh. Speaking of. So I talked about this a little bit in my Vampire of the Mind review. This story has my all-time favorite quote from the Master. And it's from the Mcqueen Master, actually. So I kind of mentioned Jemima, this girl who'd been captured by the Rocket Men, and who the Doctor recruits as his one-off companion. Well, early on in episode 2, the Master kills her. And, when everything gets sorted and they're trying to figure out what their next plan of action is because they find out they can't use the doctor at all. Boy, that was a whole plot point I ghosted over. The doctor says, "Oh, Jemima's going to stop you." And Mcqueen points out, "How can she when she's dead?" And, the doctor points out there was no need to do that. There was no need to kill Jemima, which the Mcqueen master just goes off. And part of it is, I like the quote itself. Part of it is Mcqueen's performance on it is absolutely phenomenal. "Oh, need, 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 need. That is your answer to everything, you cretin. Of course I don't need to do it. I never need to do it. If I needed to do it, it wouldn't be fun." And that's also kind of an interesting, that's also how the, working relationship between the two masters falls apart. Because, the Mcqueen master is a sadist. He enjoys mocking and causing pain, whereas the Jeffrey Beavers master wants to get on with it. Essentially, and, by the end, the doctor shows up because most of episode 4 at that point had been the masters killing the entire cult of the Heretic and then attempting to reset the universe. And then at the very end, at the climax, the doctor shows up. Like I said, in the back half of the story, McCoy is barely used, but his use is actually incredibly effective. And he's able to, reset the universe back to rights. I think that's where I'll stop for right now, just because I'm going all over the place with this review, and I think I've said everything I want to say. The Two Masters is absolutely glorious. Its three leads are all phenomenal, and, as for what is essentially, production-wise, the first multi-master story, it's actually a really great one, and I do think, in a way, it set the ground for all the multi-master stories in the future. I'm going to give the Two Masters a 10 out of 10. And for the Master Trilogy as a whole, I would probably rank them from weakest to strongest: Vampire of the Mind, and You Will Obey Me, the Two Masters. But those were just my thoughts on the Two Masters and the Master Trilogy. What were yours? Start a conversation in the comments below. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. And in the description box below, you'll find the link to my Twitter where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and I'll see you guys next time.